Hello and welcome to another episode of the Miami Hal Real Estate Show, where every single week we've got great guests on with some expertise that was really going to help you understand local real estate and what's going on in our communities. Today is no exception. Heidi Siegel is from the village of Palmetto Bay. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Hal.
And you're a new face in Palmetto Bay, so I came down and met you on a couple of occasions, and now it's time to introduce you, at least to my audience, and hopefully to the greater public, so they know what you're doing, right?
Yes, this is great.
Perfect. So your title is the Community and Economic Development Director in Palmetto Bay.
Yes.
Sounds very, very important. And a lot of times titles are confusing. What does it really mean? What is your role in the village?
Sure. So my role is to lead the planning and zoning function, as well as code compliance, business tax receipts, resiliency, and the building division. So you put all those together and it makes up community and economic development.
Got it. Okay. And when did you start with the village? Because you, as I said, you're a new face.
Yes, it was the last week of March, 2022.
All right.
Yes.
A date that will live in infamy.
Yes.
And so you've had to kind of, very quickly assimilate a lot of things in Palmetto Bay. And as you know, Palmetto Bay is an active and vocal community, right?
Yes, it's very active, hit the ground running, lots of issues, hot topics going on.
All right. And you came to Palmetto Bay for a reason, I assume. What do you expect to get out of this role, and what mark do you hope you can leave on Palmetto Bay in this role?
Sure. Well, I have almost 25 years of experience in South Florida in planning and development, and I like to be active in my experience. I like to be in a community that is dynamic, that is evolving. So I saw that in Palmetto Bay. I had been watching it for a while and talking to Nick about coming down. So the opportunity opened itself up, and here I am. What I hope to leave behind is, I don't see myself going anywhere anytime soon. I hope to be here for a while, but I just hope to bring good planning principles. I know it's a buzzword and it sounds trite, but really transparency. How you and I met, that open door. So even when you were dealing with kind of a stressful situation on your business side, and come in my office, sit down, you want a piece of chocolate, let's talk, let's figure this out. And we are still talking and figuring things out. And if I can just bring that level of professionalism, transparency to the residents, to the businesses, I think I've done well.
And although we can't bring our audience chocolates and have you sit down, you are sitting down. And if you're watching this live, you probably are in front of a social media platform as well. So type in some questions. And if we get some very good questions, we'd be happy to kind of sneak those into the conversation. And until then, Heidi, what I want to do is kind of understand a little bit more. You talked about you have the building department under your kind of jurisdiction. You've got resiliency, and then there's tax receipts. And what else? Did I miss something?
Code compliance and planning and zoning.
Oh, those are the big ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So to the regular person that's just kind of living in a community, that stuff is great buzzwords, but maybe they don't understand how it all kind of comes together. And one of the things that you shared with me in your office was that you're really there to do a job and to understand the existing code and to comply to that code.
Yes.
And that politics really doesn't enter your door. Right? So what is code compliance really about? Let's talk at the very basic level. Why is code compliance there, and what does it serve to do?
So we have code of ordinances, which are basically the rules of the road. So how you're supposed to keep your property. And code compliance is the agency that goes out and makes sure that you are following those rules. Some of them sometimes might feel like we're the flower pot police, right? We're telling you to fix the paint on your house, make it prettier, but it's really not that. It's about aesthetics for the community, which helps everyone with property values, but it's also life safety issues. So a lot of our work is response to complaints, people calling about things that they've seen, and we'll go check them out. In our world, there's two ways to call it. It's either code compliance or code enforcement. And we are deliberately code compliance, meaning we want to work with homeowners or property owners, business owners, to bring the property into compliance. So while sometimes it might feel like we're being punitive, it's not our end goal. So we we by law have the right to issue warnings, and unless it's like really something that's life safety, we're going to issue a warning and give someone usually 10 to 30 days to come into compliance. And if not, then they get a violation.
So you said you've got people going out and looking for things as well as the community calling things in.
Correct.
What is common for people to call in on code compliance?
Paint, roofs, lawns. Those are a lot of the common ones. Trash piles, you'll see, especially this time of year. And again, we try to work with the community on that one. You have people cleaning up their yards because, the in-laws are coming in from out of town. So like over the last month, we see a lot of that. They're cleaning out the garage. We're seeing, so the trash piles get a little bigger this time of year. So we do a lot of education on it. So we provide information of where to take the stuff to a dump so it's not sitting on your yard.
You mentioned roofs, and as a real estate agent, roofs are a big topic for a number of different reasons. But for code compliance, what are you looking at when you have somebody complaining or that your department finds as a roof issue that needs code compliance to be involved?
Sure. So sometimes, these are sometimes the most unfortunate cases. It might be a roof that's just structurally not okay. There might be a hole in the roof, believe it or not. We do have some of those in the village. It could also be moldy roofs. So the aesthetics come into play then.
Hole in the roof is a life safety issue, right?
Definite life safety issue.
You can get mold, and then, of course, that can affect health, et cetera.
Absolutely. Or worse, it could be a structural collapse, and we have that obligation to look out for that. So it could be everything from how it looks to actual structural issues.
So that would be a more significant thing that you would stay persistent on getting that resolved. But for example, somebody does have a trash pile. Maybe they've cleaned up the yard, as you mentioned, for the holidays, and they didn't call in for a bulk pickup on time. How does that typically get handled? And because I think a lot of people are afraid sometimes of what the village will do.
Sure.
But I don't think that's really what you're out to do, right?
So exactly. So we'll give them the information of where to take the pile. We'll give them time to come into compliance because we depend on an outside solid waste provider. They might need to work with Miami-Dade County to get a couple extra pickups. So we give them time to get that done. We talk to them about it. The important thing is that we show that the complainer, the neighbor, I was going to say neighbor, and usually it is a neighbor, someone down the street, that we're being responsive to the concern, the complaint, and that we're showing the homeowner that we're being empathetic to their situation. So we're sometimes in the middle, and we spend a lot of time in that position, but that's our job, and we're okay with it.
Got it. So, one of the things that I always pay attention to in the village is the hot button issues, and there are a few in Palmetto Bay. So far, it sounds like there's certain rules that everybody has to abide by to keep the community nice and to have values stay up, as you mentioned, and you're the agency that goes and makes sure that gets taken care of, and it seems pretty cut and dry. I'm sure there's a lot of mechanics involved, but it's an easy concept to understand what you're trying to do. But then there also tends to be a layer of politics to almost anything that happens in a community. And how do you kind of mentally handle political layers to what your department is trying to do?
Sure. We treat everyone the same, and that includes our elected officials. And I think I, as the department leader, have proven myself to them over the last 8 or 9 months with that information. They'll call me with a concern, or someone will complain to an elected official, and it makes its way back to us. Sometimes I'm the bearer of bad news to the elected official, and I have to tell them, our code says they can do that, or state statute says they can do that. And
right.
If I'm fair, and as we've talked about, if I just go by the laws and the code and I am consistent all the time, I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
If I don't play favorites, or if I don't play into it. So, I'm okay having those tough conversations. I really try to avoid the politics of it, and I think they respect me for that. I'm not a yes person, but I'm not a no person.
You're just a person.
I'm
that
just
reads
a person.
The rules
Yeah, I read
and
the
follows them.
And if there's a way that we can help someone get not around the rules, but through the rules, or find a solution, they know I'm the person to do that as well.
I think that's important. So if somebody has something on their property that they say, geez, I really like to, and I'm going to make up an example, put a shed in this area of my house because that's the right place for it for me, and it doesn't comply, there's a possibility that they can go to the village and speak to your department and see if there's a way through the code.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we have those conversations all the time, and usually those are the referrals that we get through the elected officials, because people come to them and they can't do anything about it, so they refer them to us, and we go through our variance process, our administrative variance, our public hearing process with them, lay out all the facts and give them the options of which way they want to go. And, we're there to help them through the process. And I tell that to every single person I meet with. My job here is to usher you through the process. I'm not the process, I'm not the rules, but I am the way to get through it.
That's a great way to look at it, with clarity.
Yes.
We're going to talk about our first hot button topic.
Yes.
And that is, it's the biggest one, I believe, is the downtown of Palmetto Bay. And so I will let you know, if you don't remember, and let our audience know, that way back when, I think it was around 2006, 2007, there was a calling by the village to get experts that kind of knew various aspects of business and community into the Downtown Development Task Force, is what it was called, or Redevelopment Task Force.
Yes.
And I served on that for several years, and there were a lot of good ideas that came up. And eventually, the powers that be kind of coalesced all those ideas into a plan. And the plan seemed to be ready to go and ready to implement. But here we are 15 plus years later, and very little of that original plan is still current. And so, again, to catch people up a little bit, the original thing was called officially the Downtown Urban Village, DUV code, which was 2015, many years after the original conversation started, and charrettes and other things. And now we have, and I'm looking down on my piece of paper because I want to get this right, the Downtown Palmetto Bay Code. So we went from the very beginning FTI, Franjo Triangle,
Yes.
okay, to the DUV, the Downtown Urban Village, and now to this, longer structure, which doesn't even have a three-letter acronym, right? Tell me about why all three of those kind of evolved in your mind, and are they part of your department in code compliance, or how do you kind of interpret what has happened in history? I know you don't have any say in it, but tell us about the brief history and how it plays out in your mind.
Sure. So one thing, and I hope I can give some perspective to you on this, is so much of our lives, me as a human as well, as we want instant gratification. But
Yes.
as someone who works in planning, much different than real estate, there's no such thing as instant
There's
gratification.
no downtown button on my
There's
phone.
no. And I can tell you, I live in a community that I worked in the early 2000s. And I will be driving down the major downtown area of my community, and I'll slam on the brakes. I'll be like, you're kidding me. That building finally went up. And
Can you name the community?
I live in Hollywood.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no
It's
big
not-
secret.
it's not a secret,
It's
right?
not a secret.
Okay.
No, and I worked there in the early 2000s, and I'll be going around the circle if anyone's familiar, and I'll be like, "Are you kidding me?"
There's the building.
Yeah, and I
one that you
worked on
planned
that
on.
as a young planner in 2002, maybe 2003.
20
So
years ago.
it takes time for development to happen on the private side. It could be funding, it could be negotiations with the city, whatever the reason. So there's that. For us in Palmetto Bay, there has been the evolution from the FTNI to the DUV to what we have now as the Downtown Code. I still think at the core, because I have to look at all three of them, mostly the DUV, not the FTNI, but I have to look at that. At the core, there's a lot of similarities. I don't think it's really off course. I think what has changed is what is allowed in the building footprint. So the height, the width, and the number of units.
And why do you feel like the heights and the height and width and basically the feel has changed? Has it changed because of a whim? I assume not. Has it changed because of the public's input? Where do you feel like we've gotten essentially a little bit smaller than the original plan.
Yeah, I was not here in 2020 and 2019 when these changes started to take place, but I can only assume, and I understand there was public input and a lot of meetings on it. And I can also just make an assumption that when you look around Miami-Dade County, and especially South Miami-Dade, and you've seen towers go up in other communities, that perhaps there was an emotional reaction to what some might be seeing north of Palmetto Bay and say, I don't want that here.
Right.
And so pulling back, and I still think the idea of a walkable, vibrant downtown is 100% achievable with the new code. The same elements of requiring the private property owner to do wide sidewalks, public enhancements, art in public places, all of those still exist. It's just the buildings will be a little smaller, the density will be a little smaller, but all of the core values of an urban environment are still there.
And I think one of the things that I believe many people kind of pull back and are agitated by is the word downtown. Because the minute you say downtown, people think of, monolithic buildings and concrete and not a lot of trees. And clearly that was never the intention of Palmetto Bay, right?
Correct.
Palmetto Bay is a village. It's a little town that wants to have a center. And so is there some reason why you feel like the downtown word, that stigma, has stuck in all of these different naming conventions?
No, but that's a really good point, because it keeps shrinking and shrinking, but we keep hanging on to the downtown word.
And by the way, it's probably 2006 when I stood up in our first meeting and said, do we really want to use the word downtown?
Yeah.
Because we're not creating a downtown.
Yeah.
We're creating a center.
Yes.
We do want live, work, play. We don't want to have residents of Palmetto Bay feeling like they need to go out of the community to get certain things. And why don't we have it here where it's in their footprint and it's also a good, tax basis. There's a lot of reasons. But the minute anybody else said downtown, I was even recoiling a little bit. It's like, I don't want that.
Right.
I want to have development, but I don't want a downtown.
That's an excellent point. If I could just share something we're doing away from the downtown, but kind of goes to what you're speaking about, is we just, it's going to hopefully pass on second reading in January at the Village Council, is a change in zoning to Old Cutler Road and 168th. And the idea is exactly along those lines, and it's called a neighborhood commercial district, and it is Old Cutler Neighborhood Commercial District, and it's essentially to bring more localized, small, mom and pop type businesses to that area, because the underlying zoning right now is B2, which is our highest and most intense zoning. So this was actually initiated by staff before I got here. I picked it up and we ran with it, but it's to kind of achieve what Palmetto Bay talks about, what they want to look like.
So they want to downzone the B2 you mentioned, right?
They
I don't know
want
what
to change.
B2 stands for, but
it's our highest intense zoning district.
So, for example, if it remains B2, how tall could buildings be there?
Because we have height restrictions, they could still only go to 45 feet. But what you could have is, using US 1 corridor as an example, you could have the Brand Smart Shopping Center. You could have the Aldi. Wow. I saw your eyes pop out.
Yeah.
That's the B2. You could have the Lots of Locks Aldi Shopping Center. That's the B2. The minimum lot size for B2 zoning is 30,000 square feet, which is a little under an acre.
Yeah.
So we brought it down to 5,000 square feet. We brought it down to very specific uses, no shopping centers, more very targeted neighborhood type uses, wine bars, cigar bars, restaurants, doctors, shops. So to have people come from the community, walk over, ride their bikes, but also pull in people from the Deering Estate when they visit, have them linger. So we're hoping
lingering and spend.
And spend. Good. Linger and spend, yes, yes. Not just sit outside the cafes, but actually spend their money at the cafes, yes. So, and again, this all depends on private investment, but we're putting the tools on the table for that change to take place.
And there are some that say that Palmetto Bay is the donut hole of the area. So you've got Pinecrest, which has a relatively mature but small commercial zone. You've got Cutler Bay that's absolutely exploding and building a downtown center I used the word downtown again. I shouldn't do that. A village center, because that's what it really is. And there's been a lot of businesses that have been attracted to Cutler Bay over the last 10 years or so. So what do you feel like Palmetto Bay is missing in that secret sauce to kind of get us at parity or to grow at a rate where we won't feel like a donut hole?
Yeah, there's really no correct formula, but I think we're starting to put the pieces in place. The downtown code is new again, so it's not that that instant gratification that we're always looking for. We're coming out of the pandemic. I know my phone's very busy with people wanting more information on some of those very core important pieces of the downtown area. So I think there will be movement in the next year or two of some real estate. We're doing some things behind the scenes to make it more streamlined and transparent through the development review as well as building permit process. And I also think just getting out there and talking about the village. We're going to be doing a market analysis this year. We have in the budget money to do that. And one of the great things about doing that, and I've done it in other communities, is you identify really what you can do, what your market can bear, so what you realistically can do. And then we would back into our zoning code to make sure our zoning code supports what our market can bear.
You've been doing this for 25 years, you mentioned,
almost,
approximately.
Yes, yeah.
And so you've seen this in other communities already. I remember, again, talking about my days on the committee, that we were going to rely on market study from Florida Power and Light because they do studies all the time. And you really know economic situations of how people earn and how far they commute and all this stuff. Is an independent study like Palmetto Bay is planning on doing more accurate, or is there a redoubling of effort there potentially?
Oh yes, this is not just based on data, but would also be based on community input. And when I've done this before, we talk to people. And in another community where I worked on one of these, we asked, where do you go to eat? And people talk about how they go 20 minutes away because in this particular community, it was in Palm Beach County, they liked certain chain restaurants, and there were no chain restaurants in this community, and they wanted to go to chain restaurants. That was important for this community, a working class community, very important to them to have chain restaurants. So really talking to the community, you can't always just depend on the data. And I use myself as an example. If you would look at me in a data, you would get it all wrong because I go against everything that the data says about me, right?
That's a whole nother show.
Yeah, right. No, but even just where I commute to, what kind of work I do, all of those things, the data would not line up because the city of Hollywood could look at the data and say, well, how do we get this type of person to stay here to work? Well, I work in city government. I'm always going to be on the move,
I see.
I like my home, but I'm always going to be commuting. So you just can't rely on data. You got to speak to the people. And these studies really look specifically at that.
All right. Let's talk about our second hot button issue. And again, Palmetto Bay, I believe this is your next largest concept and conversation that's been going on for years. There is a potential for a bridge to be built. And I don't want to get into the politics of this because there's plenty. But I take a mile-high view of this, knowing that ages ago, when the county was first being developed and roads were being placed where they are placed now, that there was a plan. Hey, when we need expansion, this road is potentially going to have a bridge. That road's going to potentially have a bridge, and our grid was laid out hopefully to handle the increased number of people living in the area. Now, of course, development has sprawled, let's say, and it's larger and different than people had initially anticipated. But we've got a fight, essentially, among different people in the community that have very different views on this. And I'm not looking for the political answer here. I'm wondering how that conversation and the ultimate decision that's going to be made, not by the way by Palmetto Bay, but by the county, and that Palmetto Bay hopefully has some input to that, but the decision is the county decision. How does that play into our community and our economic development? What do you think, is the future of bridges here or not here in Palmetto Bay?
Yeah, it's hard for me to opine on the grid, what the grid does for economic development, because my understanding is the concern about the bridges is really the quality of life for the homeowners. And that's the position that the village has taken. So from a planning and zoning perspective, my job is going to be, if for some reason, and it's actually in the courts, so it's not up to the county, it's ultimately up to the courts, I believe, at this point.
Well,
so if,
county and village have sued each other. There's too many lawsuits.
Right, you can't give up
for
right.
everything.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so ultimately, if for some reason the bridge is forced upon the residents in the village, my job, I think, would be to look at the code to make sure that there's no barriers in our code for our homeowners if they want to do things to their property to further shelter or buffer their properties from increased traffic, especially on these grid streets. Outside of that, I really don't know what the impact could have on economic development.
Okay, and kind of staying with the roads in general, I have a question for you. And that is one of the things that a lot of the streets and sub-communities within Palmetto Bay have asked for and gotten are speed humps. And initially, as I understand it, the conversation really wasn't about controlling speed. It was about keeping people on more primary roads and out of the communities where kids are on the streets and wanting to walk, et cetera. And so my question to you is there something in the code or something in your mind that says, speed bumps are called speed bumps for a reason, and there may be better ways for us to look at traffic flow and diversion into the right places?
Yeah, South Florida, the traffic in South Florida is always an issue. And being in planning, I've been a part of this conversation for many, many years. I served before coming down here as the chair of the Broward County Pedestrian and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory
You're
Committee.
The right person to ask
the BPAC. So
Okay.
it's a passion of mine. And I actually got on the BPAC as a runner and a pedestrian and not as a bicyclist, because usually the committees are made up of bicyclists. So I get the idea of wanting safe roads, especially in the residential neighborhoods and the communities. The speed humps and bumps, they're an effective tool, but to do other things such as circles, which again is another hot topic, you need
some coming up.
Yes, there are on Old Cutler. You need the right of way. You need larger areas. So the bumps and the humps work in the smaller streets, and it is a way to also divert traffic and slow it down at the same time. There's no good solution, because we are a community, and I say South Florida as a whole, that has exploded in population and in cars. And until we can get that under control, which I don't think there's a way to do that, we're going to always be trying to back end into some kind of solution.
You mentioned circles,
Yes.
which I at one point I read and I knew where they were going to go in. I know one's at 136 in Old Cutler. Where are the other circles going in that are going to affect Palmetto Bay and our community?
152nd is the main one for Palmetto Bay. And then there's one a little north, and I don't want to misspeak the street number.
Okay.
But 152nd is the main one. That if I always look for the positive. So the positive on that one is we're going to be working with our Art and Public Places Committee, which comes out of our office, to do some nice piece of art in there.
And do you know the timing? Because again, I read it, but I don't remember.
They're starting some of the early work for it. They will be paving and repaving some of the detour streets to prepare to start doing the circle work. So we should see the circle work within the next couple months.
That's great. Heidi, you have opened our eyes on a little bit about what you do.
Thank you.
And the more important thing is that people can reach you. You are
Absolutely.
accessible and, as you said at the beginning, transparent.
Yes.
Right. So if you want to take the last couple of seconds and
Sure.
tell people how to get in touch with you
Sure.
and your department,
Absolutely. 305-259-1276 at Village Hall. Walk in and catch me if you can, or email HSIEGEL at Palmetto Bay FL, palmettobay-fl.gov.
It's a long one, but it makes sense.
Yes.
Heidi, it's a pleasure again.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it. And whether you're residential or commercial, Heidi's the person to get in touch with. So We'll talk to you next week with another wonderful edition of the show. And until then, I hope you're shopping and the holidays are good for you. We'll see you then next week.